There are a number of ways that the ACT matrix can be used when working with trauma. The two main ones, though, are when we set up the standard matrix. It looks something like this, the circle in the middle. We can go through the matrix just naturally, moving from one quadrant to the other. Again, down here, this quadrant is usually who and what are important to you. This one here is what stuff shows up on the inside that can get in the way. And this one here is usually something like, and what do you do on the outside? When this stuff shows up to get in the way, what do you end up doing? And then up here, this question is usually, what are some things that you could be seen doing that would move you closer to or toward the things in your life that are important to you? So it's fairly simple to go through it the standard way, and it will be helpful with your clients who are experiencing trauma. In addition to that, what we're looking for here are basically the times and places and situations when those trauma memories or experiences are most present or when they show up. So for example, the client could indicate several things that are important to them, people and things. They can also indicate perhaps a couple of things that show up on the inside that can get in the way. And they may also express some trauma memories or situations, relived experiences that shows up, specific examples of those. So this could be something like a flashback or dissociation, anything trauma related here. And then they might have kind of a list of things that they do on the outside in relation to all of these things here. So what the matrix does, just kind of on its own, natively, is track when these things are showing up. These very, very trauma-related symptoms in the wider context of the person's life. So the matrix as a whole is sort of a representation of the person's life. It's got a little bit of everything here. And then within that subset, you've got these trauma symptoms or memories or anything we want to call them. Now that we've got a good hang of that, so after doing this for a while, for instance, they may get a good hang of when the trauma-focused symptoms are present for them in their life. After doing that, we want to do one other thing. And that other thing is setting up the matrix as usual, but this time, instead of just kind of identifying and noticing when those trauma symptoms are present in the person's life, we will do a matrix centered totally around those trauma symptoms. So up here I'm just going to kind of label this one trauma here. That'll be the topic of this entire matrix. So when the trauma experience is present for them, they can then launch into this other matrix. And this other matrix would just be a noticing or a sorting task. And the object of the sorting task would be when you are in the middle of experiencing this trauma experience, whether it's a dissociation or a relived experience or a memory or something like that, we still want to notice what is going on inside of you. So this is stuff down here. What is going on inside of you? And so that's literally as that trauma experience is happening. What is going on inside of you? And then also you may notice kind of what urges are you having? These things can either go down here in the bottom box, or if we're actually acting on those urges, they can go up here in the top box, though the exact placement really doesn't matter, just the noticing matters. So what is going on inside? Any urges that are present, any actions that are related to those urges. And then additionally notice anything that might be in this moment important to you. So this is important still. So in this moment, any of the things that are important to you and any of the things that you may be doing in that moment that are what we call committed actions, or things that will move you closer to who and what are important to you. So this may look a little odd, because how can we get from here, just noticing a trauma event showing up, to here? Well, after practicing this for a period of time, the kind of noticing becomes fairly easy. As you go about your day, you should be able to kind of sort your life into these categories. And that itself will be quite helpful for you. Once we've kind of gotten a hang of doing this way and done it for a period of time, this should then become fairly doable. And so when that trauma experience is present, all we're doing is we're mapping the experience itself into these 4 quadrants here. The purpose of this is to highlight that when the trauma experience is happening, there isn't just one thing that's going on for the client. There's actually quite a lot that is going on for the client. Number 1 is the stuff that's happening on the inside. Number 2 is all of the things that they may be doing in response to that stuff showing up on the inside. And then 3 and 4 are those things that they still do have some control over here in the case of committed actions, but also the other things that are still kind of inherently in them or inside of them, which are the things that they find important or valuable to their life in that moment on the inside. And then, of course, there's always the self, which is present even in a case of dissociation. So, for example, if what's going on right now is dissociating, where is the self in that moment? Where is the self going in that moment? So if there's a disconnect between kind of the senses and the self, where is the self? And then who is the person that is noticing that dissociation happening? And from this place of noticing the self, who and what are important to you? What else do you notice that's happening? And from this place of noticing these 2 things, what would you be willing to do in this moment? And so we're reconnecting to the self there. Again, it's important to think about the matrix not only as a tool that is used, so we're really not just whipping it out and saying, okay, let's kind of just go through this real quickly, but we're really utilizing it throughout our life. So it's not just a tool that we're using once in a while, but it's a framework of the therapy itself. Which is why here, once we reach this point, it is pretty doable for the client. It's pretty workable because the client has such an experience doing it over here, just kind of generally overall. Another way of using the matrix is something that I've been playing around with as a new way of doing the matrix. And I call this matrix the survival vital matrix. And so it looks the same on the surface, except instead of toward and away, on the 2 arrows in the horizontal line, we put a V for vital and an S for survival. And we switch up just the language a little bit. So we're not using the terms toward and away here, we're using the terms vital and survival. So we know that the body, as well as the mind, has certain survival mechanisms, which are a product of our evolution. And because we're so close to our history and our evolution physiologically, sometimes those can sort of override what is going on for us or our conscious choices. And sometimes we do have quite a bit of control over those. In addition to that, we also have the ability to choose what is vital or important to us in our lives. So vital here meaning just incredibly important, right? The most valuable things in life, vital. Here, survival meaning just the natural processes of survival, which are bodies primarily, and also everything else about us through evolution has been pointed towards this idea of survival. So when we set up the survival vital matrix in this manner, there are a couple of different changes we want to make. Down here in the bottom right-hand quadrant, the question is fairly similar. It's just who and what, or what are the things in your life that are the most vital to you. So what is most vital to you? And we can let the client answer those, as many as they'd like. And then here for survival, the question just becomes, what are some of the things on the inside that you notice that might be some of those survival mechanisms or survival instincts that you've been noticing? And we can set this up with some psychoeducational information about, what does it mean in terms of our body's natural physiological responses to trauma, and why our body does some of those things. In other words, why does our body do some of the natural responses that it does to unnatural events in a person's life? So that survival stuff is all there, right? And so, of course, if we're kind of breaking it down to the big three, of course, there's the big three, which are fight, flight, and freeze, the three Fs here. But if you're working from some other models, for example, like polyvagal model, or any of the other body-centered models, all of that can very easily slide right into this section. So if the client already has some psychoed about any of these things here, it'll work great. If not, you can give them just a very brief overview of whichever one you're partial to, in terms of the stuff that our body does and stuff that our mind does to try to survive. Another way of asking this question when I'm working with the survival vital matrix is just to say, what are some of the ways that you've noticed your body defaulting to, any of the survival mechanisms or instincts that you've noticed yourself defaulting to. And that kind of language usually works pretty well, defaulting to. So sometimes our body defaults to certain survival instincts or mechanisms, and other times we, the self here, can choose very much who and what are important to us, and also our actions. So up here on the top right, it's very similar to the traditional matrix. These are just what I'll call vital moves. And that's exactly the same as committed actions or toward moves. Things you can be seen doing that would get you, closer to what is most vital to you. Over here on the top left, we've got what I call survival moves. And those survival moves are any of the actual actions that we may take in some sense for survival, right? So moving away from danger is a survival move. Hiding from danger is a survival move. Freezing in place is, in some sense, a survival move. And then, of course, any of the other body-centered processes that you like can come in here, as well as any of the things that are, that we see every day. So, for example, if we're arguing with our spouse or something, we may begin to raise our voices or become confrontational, or we may separate ourselves from that interaction, slam a door, anything like that. In some sense, those are all survival moves, because we're trying to either win that altercation, win that argument or separate ourselves from it. So we're doing things, just kind of framing it as survival moves. So a lot of stuff can come in here, and just like always, you can assess the workability of any of these survival moves. So as you're listing these out, or afterwards, as you're working with a client, you can go through each of these moves and really parse it out. How is it working for you? Is it working for you as a survival move? Perhaps. And then same thing with the vital moves. How are they working for you? Are they actually doing what they say that they're doing, or not? The beauty of the survival vital matrix is that these things are not really opposed to each other. In fact, you may as well just kind of lop off the arrows here, and sometimes I will do that, and we'll just put in the S here and the V here, because it's not one or the other, right? So there are several things that we do for survival that are also vital to us, and there are several things that we do that are vital to us that are also survival. There's really no distinction in terms of polar opposites from each other. That's not what we're after here. All we're doing is that sometimes we default to survival moves, and sometimes we choose vital moves, right? Sometimes we default here, sometimes we choose here. The problem only exists when we become locked or stuck in one of the sides. So for example, if we're spending the majority of our life engaging in these survival moves, then our quality of life perhaps changes. And if we are locked engaging most of our time, most of our energy in these vital moves, but neglecting these survival moves, our experience of life also changes here. So for example, I'm just going to put like an example, sex. Right, so we'll do that here. So sex is a survival move, right? So this is kind of an inside thing, so this would be like desire for sex. And then the actual move would be the act of sex itself. That's a survival move, right? So that's kind of put into our DNA in terms of perpetuating our species. But of course, it's also perhaps a vital move, right? So that's something that may be very important to us. Like a healthy sex life might be something that's very vital to us, with our partner. So vital sex life with partner may be something that's very vital to us. At the same time, it may be wrapped up in a lot of things here, especially if we're talking about trauma. A lot of these survival moves related to sex. So it can be both. At the same time, it can also become problematic in certain ways. So this is not a good versus bad scale, right? There's no value judgments at all, either direction. They're really not directions at all. It's just vital or survival, or vital and survival, either way. Another thing that we can put in here, let's do another example of a vital move. So for example, like something that feels vital may be just like a sense of like accomplishment or winning. Being right, being knowledgeable. These all may be things that are vital to this person. But you can imagine how quickly those can become problematic if all we're doing is striving for those few things. So the survival vital matrix is pretty handy. It lends itself well to work in trauma. The clients really grab onto it fairly quickly, and they're able to kind of carry around this map with them. If we do it in a couple of sessions here, they can take this page with them and have kind of a sense of what to target or look for, and then they're able to kind of notice these things happening. Their survival moves, vital moves, and then their inside survival stuff and inside vital stuff. Again, this is not just a tool, but it's like a a major feature of the therapy, so you can use this every single session, right? You can pull it out and do a survival vital matrix and say, how were things going for you this week in terms of your survival vital moves, right? What kind of vital moves did you make this week? What kind of survival moves did you notice this week? And so on. The therapy begins there. And just like always, we want to reconnect to this idea that there's a self, right? There's a big you in the middle of all of this that's going on. And really connect to this ability to notice this experience that is happening for you and to you, and then notice your ability to choose what kind of moves you would like to engage in at any given moment. Through the consistent use of the sorting, and then also, lots of practice in terms of any other skills that we're throwing into the therapy. The ideal goal is for the client to be able to kind of connect to this self that is here, notice any of these survival moves, survival instincts or mechanisms that are showing up on the inside and the outside, and to cut those off, if possible, before they become something, if the something that they are going to become is not workable for them in that moment. And if they are already engaged in something like a survival move that isn't workable for them in the moment, to unhook from that move, stop it, and then reconnect with who and what are vital to them, and then engage in a vital move. Again, this is not good versus bad here. It's both, right? Survival and vital, they kind of work together. Neither one is more important than the other. Survival moves exist for a reason, right? They keep us alive. So we're certainly not trying to cut off a survival move if it is in fact workable in that moment. We're only focused on the ones that have not been working for the client or for the self. Going back to my example here with sex, so we can see how perhaps if we're talking of some certain traumas, how thoughts about sex or the inner experience, so this would be sex in here, inner experience, so any thoughts or feelings related to sex may be in fact at odds with a value or a vital piece of content here, which is sex life with partner. So these two things may be at odds with each other, but also these two things may be at odds with each other. So our thoughts or feelings or inner experience about sex, and then the outer experience of sex. So this is the actual act, and this is kind of the inner experience or internal representation of sex. You can see how there's tons and tons of opportunity for conflict here, as well as here. So we can work along these two directions when we're working with the client. It doesn't, obviously it's not just about sex, but with any of their inner experience and the outer experience, we can work along these two axes. That's why the matrix exists. So along this line here, we're kind of exploring the conflict between, something that is very vital in a person's life and some of these inner feelings about that same thing. And then we're also exploring the differences between what is happening on the inside in terms of our thoughts or feelings about an experience and the actual act. So, for example, the actual act may be much different from the thoughts or feelings on the inside in lots of directions. So the actual act may be much worse than the inner experience or the inner thoughts or feelings about it, and the actual act may be much better than subjectively than the inner experience is. So understanding that these two things are not exactly the same, in fact they're almost always different, right? Our inner thoughts about something and then the actual actions of the something are usually fairly different, and then the experiences after the fact of the act lead to more inner stuff, and that could be here or could be here. So just recognizing that the pattern takes place, and then also understanding and exploring and processing out the differences between something that may be coming up as a survival instinct and then also as a vital piece of, something that is important to the person. And how could that be? That something could be, so if we, like, say for example, we put in an extra word here, just put like fear. So it's just fear of sex, right? So this could exist here, but also this could exist for the same person, right? They could have a deep fear of sex or sexual experiences, but also deeply want and desire a sex life with somebody, and hopefully, an appropriate one. So the map, again, is just as much for you, the therapist, as it is for the client. Mapping it out in this manner allows you, the therapist, then to really hone in on a couple of these different distinctions, here and then here, this way. So that you, as a therapist, now have kind of a clear understanding of a lot of what's going on for the client. And then the client has, this whole thing to take home with them. I recommend always that if you're doing any kind of matrix work with clients, that the client gets to keep it, of course, if they're drawing it, if they're doing it, but also the therapist should keep a copy to use for their treatment plans. And so you could take a scan of it or whatever you need to do. But the therapist may be able to kind of look at this and really plan out, the following session while the client is gone. So it's fairly handy in a number of ways. So here's just a cleaned up view of that survival vital matrix. Again, just like the traditional matrix, we usually start down here and we move our way in this direction. And the way I might phrase these questions, you're free to, of course, change them up however fits you and your clients best, is, but my usual is just, what is vital to you in your life? And that could include what or whose. So who and what are vital to you in your life here. And then over here, what survival instincts or mechanisms do you notice showing up inside of you? And then, of course, this is after just a little bit of psychoeducation about, what do we mean by survival instincts or mechanisms? Well, we mean those things that our bodies kind of train to do over, millions of years of evolution. The stuff that's totally and completely natural for us to be doing and to be thinking and to be feeling. The stuff that ultimately, kept our ancestors safe. And then up here, the question is just something like, what survival moves do you tend to default to when you notice some of these things showing up inside of you? So what are some of the survival moves that you default to? And then here, what are some of the vital moves that you could make, that you can make, or that you can see yourself making that would kind of be consistent with this vital life that you just talked about a second ago? And then here, again, we always want to connect it to the self, right? There's a big me that's in the middle. So really, when we're doing it with a client, it's just a big me in the middle here, like this. There's always a self that's right here in the middle that is capable of noticing these things showing up, capable of noticing any behavior that's showing up, and also capable of choosing and changing actions. And one last piece to wrap up, both the traditional matrix and the survival vital matrix, what we're doing here in these boxes is assessing the workability of these moves. So we're talking a lot about how are they working for the client in their lives. We're genuinely curious. We're not trying to make any value judgments here, but we're very just curious about how are they actually working in terms of their intended purpose. Is it actually keeping you safe? Yes or no? Is it actually moving you, closer to what is vital to you? Perhaps not. So up here is all about workability. Down here is just about mindfulness and kind of noticing what's important, vital to you, the stuff that's showing up, the difference between thoughts and feelings, the difference between thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And then also here in the center is all about empowerment, empowering. So we're empowering the self, or the me here, to be able to kind of really focus and choose the things that are vital in your life now, right? Not what was vital to you yesterday, but the things that are vital to you in this moment and moving forward, right? The kind of person that you want to be is engaged in these vital things down here. So that's an empowerment move. Another empowering move here, or ability to train up, is this idea that there is a you that is here that can be aware of these things that are showing up inside of you. And there is a you that is here right now in this moment that can be aware that these things that are showing up are no more and no less than certain survival mechanisms or instincts that have been around for millions and millions of years, and that are a vital part, in fact, of being an organism that is alive on this planet. So there's a you that is here that can notice those things happening. And if there is a you that is here that can notice these things happening as they are happening, then perhaps that means that there is a you that is here that is separate from these things that are happening inside of you. And if there is a you that is here right now that is capable of noticing these things happening, and capable of knowing what they are, and capable of noticing that you are separate from these things, then perhaps these things might have much less influence over your life. So that's an empowerment ability. And then another empowering ability is connecting to this me here in the middle, or the self, that is capable of choosing which actions they would like to partake in at any given moment, even in the presence of some of these things here that are showing up on the inside. So even in the face of some of the stuff that is showing up, the self here, the me, can still choose to engage in a vital move, and that same self still has the power to, even in the face of what is important or vital to them in their life, choose to make a survival move, or make a move, either vital or survival, that is not workable for them in that moment, right? So that choice is still theirs. It's always theirs. They've got that pure, raw ability to notice what is going on and to choose some of the actions that they would like to partake in. And that comes, after a time, especially after some of these other empowering moves have been trained, and some of these abilities have been built up, particularly this one here of just noticing these things and what they are, not believing in them as what they say that they are.